I remember when I played my first Shenmue game back in my high school days. It changed a lot about how I viewed JRPGs and their potential. It was my first experience with a JRPG that had an open world sandbox, where the towns and cities could be explored in detail without many load screens. A majority of the NPCs were interactable and completely voiced, something that was unprecedented at the time. Even today, some games don't have complete voice dialogue for the main story, let alone all the NPCs in the game. But the one aspect that really made Shenmue special was its use of realism in its world building. It offered a slice of life gameplay that resembled normal everyday life. There were day and night cycles where different NPCs would appear at certain times, and various jobs to do for money. The story didn't involve fighting gods or monsters, and the characters didn't wake up one day to be the chosen one or have magical powers. It was just about a normal guy going on a journey for revenge while improving his martial arts along the way. It was a breath of fresh air to experience something different, and its focus on martial arts got me hooked.
Are you even trying?
After Shenmue 2 ended on that amazing cliffhanger, I was sad there wasn't going to be another game to look forward to. That is, until the day Shenmue 3 had their Kickstarter and surpassed their initial goals. I was overjoyed that I was finally able to get back into the world of Shenmue to continue Ryo's journey. Granted, I'm a year late, but better late than never. I wanted to wait until this was something I was in the mood to play so I wouldn't come in jaded. That mood came last week when I was ready to dive into the world of Shenmue once again. Booting up the game and hearing Shenmue's main theme on the start menu flooded me with nostalgia. I was excited, and it was a great feeling to finally be able to pick up where I left off years ago. Shenmue 3 has Japanese and English voiceovers available, and I typically always use Japanese voices, but the correct choice here is to use the dubs, because the terrible voice acting was such an iconic part of the Shenmue franchise, and I didn't want to miss out on this.
Do you have any idea where your father might have gone?
No, I don't.
Within the first few minutes, I knew I made the right decision. The voice acting was just as I remembered from the good old days. As I continued playing, I started feeling even more nostalgia. The look of the characters and the feel of the controls were very reminiscent of what I remembered when I played the old Shenmue. As much as I liked it and what it did, it had plenty of issues in regards to its clunky and unresponsive feel. It was common to have some difficulties moving around NPCs or navigating tight spaces due to Ryo having incredibly stiff movements. This stiffness also made its way into combat, making it feel like I was fighting the controls the whole time instead of the enemy. While the feel is much better in Shenmue 3, there were still a few instances where I was reminded that he hasn't learned to loosen up. It's not the worst though, and is far less offensive than Ryo's health draining whenever he moves. This is my biggest issue with Shenmue 3. You can't do anything without losing health, which makes no damn sense. This system just makes it a huge pain to get from point A to point B, and makes exploring feel punishing, which should never happen. Not to mention traveling by foot is the main way to get around, as fast traveling doesn't really exist. I get that developers wanted a type of stamina to limit the activities that can be done in a day, but this is not a good way to approach it. There are two ways to really solve this problem, and neither are good solutions. One is to buy and use items, which normally is fine and dandy, but money isn't that easy to come by in Shenmue. Money can be earned through multiple sources like gambling, or by getting a job. Gross. Gambling is much faster than working a job, but it still takes some time to build up a good savings, and no matter what I did, it felt like an absolute grind. When I did have money, I'd much sooner spend it on other things like capsule toys rather than food, because let's face it, I have to prioritize the more important expenditures first. The other solution is to wait for the little bit of health that recovers, but it drains again pretty fast once I start running. Training dummies and sparring will also eat into Ryo's health. Training is more effective when health is in the green, but once it gets low, its effects are lessened, so I had to decide whether I wanted to waste my health running or using it for training. I picked training. Of course, this meant I was constantly walking to most of my destinations, but it's better than having my health go to waste. While the stamina system was super annoying, to say the least, the worst of it came when I actually had to fight. Having spent most of my health training and running around meant I never actually had any health when I did come across any combat encounters. In this situation though, it did feel like it was worth using items because enemies don't play around on Nightmare difficulty. Well, use items or be cheap and come back the next day after a good night's rest. Health management was the worst change they brought to Shenmue, but there were also a few smaller things I wasn't too fond of. The QuickTime events, or QTE, were one of the defining characteristics of Shenmue and allow cutscenes to play out differently depending on the player actions and actually affected the story in a small way. At least in the old games it did. But in Shenmue 3, QTEs didn't do that and was just something you had to do to get through the story. Instead of having a scene play out differently when a QTE was failed, it would just start over until it was successful, making it much less interesting. The silver lining is that it does make it easier to see all the fail scenes without having to reload, which is nice. Progression also felt repetitive and grindy. In order to get stronger, Ryo has to train his body using different exercises with dummies and sparring, which just involves repeating one very basic task until it's mastered. I thought sparring would be a cool practice mode to get better at combat, which was actually pretty unique. But it just turned out to be waiting for a QTE event to pop up and nothing else I did really mattered. Training required little concentration, but I had to do a lot of it to get stronger, so I just had YouTube up on another monitor and watched videos while I did it. It required just enough attention where I had to be able to see the screen, but not enough where I actually had to be focused. I never imagined I'd watch this many YouTube videos while playing a video game, but here I am. The sad thing is, training wasn't the only time I did this. I was also watching YouTube during general gameplay since the game kind of drags on in certain areas. There were unskippable cutscenes, having to walk everywhere because of health, the slow investigation scenes with the first-person camera, and even the wood chopping job that can be almost spammed through. However, even with its problems, I still really enjoyed the game. Surprising, I know. The slice of life gameplay I knew Shenmue would deliver was what really kept it fun for me. Exploring the town, getting to know the locals, and just experiencing Ryo's everyday life was all I needed. It helped that there were no objective markers and the UI was fairly limited in what was displayed. This let me focus more on the world instead of just opening the map and bolting it to the next objective. I took my time getting to know the area I was in and the people that lived there. Of all the characters, I grew especially attached to Shenhua, who accompanies Ryo on his travels. She had a caring and kind nature which drew me to her. I spent every night exhausting the dialogue options before she would finally tell me to go to bed and wouldn't talk to me anymore. I like how her relationship with Ryo grows over the course of the game, and it seems like there could be something more that can happen between them, though I'm not sure how I feel about that since he does have another love interest in his life. Other flavor characters were also done pretty well and added a lot of charm to the two locales that were visited. Bailu Village is my favorite since it's a small rural area that gave me a very homey and welcoming vibe. It was much easier to talk to everyone and build that connection. Niawu, the second town, was nice too, offering a city perspective to contrast the quiet village life. But because it's a city, it has a much denser population, so I didn't spend as much time talking to everyone, making me feel less connected to the place overall. As I took the time to talk to locals, I also came to learn about their problems. Problems that I could help out with. Side quests were a nice part of the world building and helped give the characters a much richer feel. These quests contained various tasks from helping a kid finish his capsule toy collection to beating up some bad guys. Some quests even take advantage of the 24-hour day system, which I learned the hard way. I was a bit salty for not realizing I could fail quests for taking too long, but it's cool that the time system has more use than just changing the aesthetic look of the environments. Side quests weren't the only thing that kept me busy though. The vast variety of side activities to do is the defining feature of Shenmue. I could take my time completing my collection of capsule toys, training, fishing, collecting herbs to sell, or goofing off and exploring. I came across arcades and gambling dens where there were a wide assortment of minigames to play with prizes. They were all different and it was fun trying them all out, at least before I started grinding for money, at which point it started feeling more like work. The Turtle and Frog races destroyed my controller with the button mashing. They were obviously rigged, but that didn't stop me from trying my hardest to win. The QTE games were the ones that stuck out for me the most because I like to test my reaction times to see if they're good or not. Too bad reaction speed doesn't really matter in this game. They even had a rip-off virtual fighter game with ducks called Chobu-chan Fighter. A pretty cool Easter egg if you ask me. These activities added a lot of realism to Shenmue's setting, which I consider to be the most appealing aspect of the game. Realism also plays an important role in the story, which is a nice change of pace from the fantasy settings that are typically used. Instead of swords and magic, Ryo had to rely and improve his martial arts on his journey through training and hard work. As someone who grew up watching martial arts films, seeing it be a core part of the story is a big draw. It even has some of the same beats in the narrative. Ryo always comes across someone who is stronger than him, so he has to train under someone to get better. These moments of being a young grasshopper doing seemingly random things like catching chickens to improve one's reflexes reminded me of all the ridiculousness in those movies and were always amusing. It was cool to see all the different martial arts styles being shown in the game despite it being pretty minimalistic. In combat, everyone seems to be using mostly the same basic moves, even though the styles are very different. Regardless, combat was still fun and challenging after getting used to the feel and wonky lock-on controls. Ryo had a good variety of moves that made it engaging, and I couldn't just keep mashing buttons to win because enemies actually block and counter. It was about timing dodges or sidesteps, predicting the moves, and learning the attack patterns to know when to strike. With everything said and done, Shenmue 3 ended up being kind of a love-hate relationship. Sure, there were plenty of things wrong, but there are more things that made it more enjoyable than it was irritable. The world of Shenmue was never boring, and it allowed me to enjoy taking my sweet time with the plethora of activities to do. Whenever I was tired of doing one thing, there was always something else waiting for me, and it never felt like I had to progress the story to keep enjoying the game. The setting was done well, and I have grown to like it tremendously as I spend more time in it. It's a bit disappointing I likely won't be able to continue the story, since the game performed below expectations. There is little hope for a sequel, but sometimes these things happen. On the bright side, I'm glad I got the chance to enjoy a new Shenmue game, and reaffirm why it's such a great series despite its flaws.